Man, it's been a while since I played Rise, and it feels so much better than World in my opinion. So I've gotten a comment that I found interesting, which is that they feel stiff while trying to play this game. Now, if you guys don't know me, when I first played Monster Hunter World, I felt incredibly stiff. I could not even imagine defeating monsters by myself. However, after some time of understanding the combat and everything else in the game, I'm now able to defeat any monster in Rise. Just not in World. There's a few outliers out there, don't worry about it. I will say to the specific people who have gotten Rise as their first Monster Hunter game that you guys are lucky. In my opinion, I think World is much harder to play than Rise, but that might be because I transferred my skills over from World to Rise, who knows. Anyways, let me tell you guys how I got rid of that stiff feeling, and maybe this video can help you out for when you're playing through Rise. Firstly, you should know about sheathing your weapon. Yes, I know I already talked about it in the other video, but you should not underestimate this small thing. There's moments in the fight where it's okay to just put your weapon away to start healing yourself, or just to avoid the monster's attacks. It's much better to just sheath your weapon away and start sprinting to avoid getting hit, rather than having your weapon out with your slow movement and hoping to dodge through a monster's attack, only to just die because you're an absolute idiot. However, I believe that sheathing your weapon away is dependent on what weapon you're using. Take the lance for example. It's much better to keep your weapon out so that you can make full use of that chunky ass shield, because you can block attacks with it. Whereas something like the greatsword requires you to constantly sheath and unsheath your weapon, because no one wants to walk around with a greatsword where it horribly slows you down. Although there are players that are able to constantly keep the weapon out. I just realized that I barely sheath the longsword once I have it out, because I know I can make full use of the longsword's counters for whenever I see the monster is about to attack. Unless I mess up during the fight and don't time my counters perfectly. That's when I make sure to heal myself up and get back into the fight. Remember that it's all dependent on the weapon you're using, but you should also just generally sheath your weapon away before using an item. Even though the game automatically does it for you, I feel better just manually sheathing the weapon to use an item. Also, maybe you like to sprint just a little bit before using an item so that you're a tiny bit away from the monster first. Or even better, thanks to Rise, you can just jump on your dog and you can easily distance yourself away from the monster to use items. Thank God for the doggo. I feel like some of the clunkiness comes from weapon sheathing, because whenever you have your weapon out, your buttons change along with your character's movement. Just think of it this way. Having your weapon unsheathed means you're in combat mode. Pressing either X, A, ZR, and maybe ZL is now linked to the weapon you're using. Your movement is also limited depending on the weapon, which means you can't sprint, and depending on how heavy the weapon is, you can be extremely slow or just slow while moving. Once you sheath the weapon back, you're now in non-combat mode, meaning that you don't have access to your weapon, but you have access to sprinting, using wire bug movements, jumping on the dog, and you can use items. You can always unsheath your weapon pressing X or ZR, allowing you to instantly get back into combat mode. Talking about the weapon you're using, you should remember that some weapon moves are influenced by the way you move the stick. When I started playing, I used to always hold down forward. I know, what a rookie mistake. It happens, man. Always holding down forward can mess with some moves. For example, the charge blade has a move that makes you slide forward or any other direction. This would mess me up sometimes when I'm doing combos. This actually comes down to weapon knowledge, because every weapon has their own button inputs. So just know how to use your weapon and you shouldn't mess up. If you mess up, then it looks like you need more time in the training area, which I know it can be boring, but if you can figure out some nice combos, then you can bring it to your fights. Since we're still on the topic of weapons, this is probably the most important factor when it comes to playing the game easily, which is that you should know how your weapon works. If you don't know how your weapon works, then you will have a hard time playing this game no matter what. Learn how to use your weapon. Learn the mechanics behind it so that you know how to deal the most damage out of your attacks. You should also learn that you don't need to always perform long combos. Just some small short combos to deal damage to the monster so that they'll eventually tire themselves out. It can even be one hit until you get another chance to start going all in with a long combo. Once you get good enough with a particular weapon, you should be able to do any combos without it getting interrupted by the monster's attacks too much. I'd say for a complete beginner, I would recommend to use the dual blades. It's one of the easiest weapons to use. The only bad thing about this weapon is the short range compared to the other weapons, and the fact that it doesn't come with a shield. However, it's very good for being a fast and flexible weapon that's great for avoiding monsters' attacks. I have done a tutorial for this weapon as well, so you can go ahead and check that out. Link is in the description box below. Another thing that I like to point out with these weapons is that they all have their own pacing. Some weapons can be fast-paced and others can be slow-paced. Knowing the pacing of each weapon can help you understand how to fight in battle. I'd say the greatsword is a slow-paced weapon that requires timing and positioning to efficiently use the weapon, whereas something like the sword and shield is more fast-paced and doesn't require much timing. Knowing the difference between them can help understand the speed of you using the weapon. Don't expect to be extremely fast when you're using a weapon that's slow. Here's a great example. The longsword can feel quite clunky at times. There's one move that I completely avoid using, and that's the overhead slash. You would very rarely see me use this move. The reason why is because the move is extremely slow. As for the other moves, they are much faster, and to me, they have better value. The quick jab lets me ready up for a counter. The fade slash helps me with setting up the spirit blade combo. There's a lot of other moves that have great value, but the greatest thing I'd say about the longsword is the pacing of the weapon. I'd say the longsword sits between being a fast and slow weapon. You can be fast at times, but the moments that you slow down, that can really help out with timing a counter. Sometimes I like to slow down after an attack so I can fit in a counter, because the counter only works after an attack. However, as I said, this is just an example of weapon pacing, and this only works for the longsword. Other weapons have their own pacing, and you just need to match them so that you can feel comfortable while using them. The item bar. As I said in the other video, I barely use it. I mostly use the item wheel, and ever since I made that change, Monster Hunter felt so much better. I really do wonder how it was like in the previous games because I heard that the wheel never existed. I might be wrong, but if it's true, then the other games must have been a struggle. Learn how to use the item wheel more because it's much more fluid than the bar. Be sure to customize it to fit your playstyle. Here's an example of what I use, and maybe you can use it for yourself if you like. You should look into building or upgrading armor sets. Obviously, better armor equals more defense. However, each armor piece comes with a skill. These skills can actually help with your gameplay experience. For example, the stamina surge skill can help with quickly regaining stamina. Some weapons like the dual blades use up stamina, so having that skill on will help with using this weapon. Or how about the focus skill, which helps with weapons that have gauges to fill, and it affects the speed of charge attacks. So weapons like the greatsword, where the charge attack can take a while for you to perform, will be much faster. Be sure to look at each skill because they do actually help you out. In the end, I think it comes down to knowing the weapon and learning what to do against the monster. If you know how your weapon works, then you should be able to fight against any monster. You should also know that some weapons perform better against some monsters. Although, there are some players that can defeat any monster with a single weapon. I believe that's only possible if you're 100% comfortable with that weapon. As for me, I went on a wild goose chase when it came to feeling the right weapon. I went from the greatsword, longsword, switch axe, bow, gun lance, and finally ended up with the charge blade. However, as of now, I can use any weapon. It just depends on what monster I'm fighting, and if I'm feeling a change of pace. Like, maybe I want to try something different. Unless I'm pissed off and I just go for a weapon that I know I can destroy the monster with. Also, don't expect to instantly feel comfortable with this game. If you're new to Monster Hunter, it's going to take you a while. It took me a while to get used to the controls. But once you get good at it, this game becomes really fun. Anyways, that's it from me. I hope you guys found this video useful in some way. Be sure to give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and I shall see you guys later.